Registry Matters is an independent production. The opinions and ideas here are that of the host and do not reflect the opinions of any other organization. If you have problems with these thoughts, FYP.
Recording live from FYP Studios East and West, transmitting across the internet, this is episode 283 of Registry Matters. I would ask Larry how he's doing this evening, but Larry isn't joining us tonight because he has come down with a small little case of the Rona. You know, that thing that didn't really happen a few years ago that locked everybody down and killed a bunch of people, but, you know, that didn't actually happen. So what we do have, though, is I have asked to have a guest on where we would talk about all the things going on in Pennsylvania, and that guest is Randall from PARSOL. So without further ado, we'll just head on over to that interview. Well, joining us now is Randall Hayes from PARSOL, and PARSOL, we've never had anybody, well, we've had Theresa on a handful of times talking about, probably more, we've talked about her position as being a clinical psychotherapist, I think is the word that I heard her use this morning, and not so much necessarily from like legislative angle. So this is going to be an opportunity to talk to one of the leaders of PARSOL, which is the Pennsylvania chapter of NARSOL. So it's Pennsylvania Rational Sexual Offense Laws. Is that going to be the right title for it?
Throw in the association and you got it. Pennsylvania Association.
Okay. PA. You happen to kind of double that up then. So PA, that is the abbreviation for Pennsylvania. So it's the Pennsylvania Association. Gotcha. And so let's just dive in and talk more about from your own personal point of view. How did you find it? How did you decide to get involved? And I'm asking this from the frame of there are so many people, like, I don't pick a number, 700, 800, 900,000 people that are impacted by the registry directly, forget the families and so forth. And so many of them choose to do nothing, stay below the firing line and so forth. So why did you choose to? How did you find PARSOL? How did you find NARSOL? How did you get involved even to begin with?
Well, I think like a fair amount of people who get involved in this movement, you know, I had my own legal consequences back in 2010, and I did a bid from 2011 until around 2014. And hearing the director of NARSOL, Brenda Jones, speak recently, she talked about the prisoner outreach and how important the digest was to people on the inside. And that reminded me, yeah, that was really important to me. That was really important to me to get that information on a regular basis on the inside and see what was going on. And I guess that's when the seed was planted that when I get out and get back, you know, to the community, I want to take part in it. And took my time doing it. You know, 3 years or so had passed. You know, I still followed the cause, but it wasn't until 3 years or so that I said, okay, let me make a damn move and reach out. So emailed NARSOL, they put me in contact with the state contact for PARSOL, which was Theresa. And, you know, before long, I was on the board of directors and pitching in.
It doesn't take long. There's so few people that do anything show up. Hey, you're the executive director. And it's not that easy, but many organizations, the guy in South Carolina, he was essentially a lone wolf for like a decade, and then built up and created an affiliate outside of just being the contact. And he would go to the state legislature by himself, and he was just the guy in South Carolina until they formed the South Carolina chapter. Did you come into the movement with any level of expertise? So the guy that I co-host with, who incidentally happens to have COVID, which is really why I needed like, Randall, help me. So Larry has COVID, but he has been following politics and legislative sessions and so forth since he was like a preteen. And I don't think that's a very common thing for people to do. So when we all start following this stuff, it's like a big kabuki machine. It's, what is a committee? Who do you talk to? And so did you show up here like Larry, or are you a layperson, so to speak, like the rest of us?
I hear that. I think the process is complex by design, and that in general, the people who, pull the strings and pull the levers of power, they in general don't want the pesky common person to get involved. And so I don't think there's exactly a concerted approach to make this stuff more digestible or understandable. So the short answer is no. I did not have any, formal training on this kind of thing before I jumped in. But I was just kind of or interested, or just as curious, you might say, ever since really the war in Iraq. And
Okay.
when I saw that major things can happen in reality, like bombs dropping and people losing their lives based on lies and on misdirection from the people who are there to help us, right? Who are supposed to be there to protect us. And what an odd thing that this could happen. And this happened kind of quickly for me from 9/11 happening and being USA rah 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 to a couple years later and seeing that this does not add up. And so that's kind of where the seed was planted. And ever since like 2003, I've been, like I said, interested in politics and in government stuff. But I didn't lift a finger to get involved really until right around 2016.
Okay. Interesting. Interesting that something even that far back would kind of plant that seed. And so then you get involved with PARSOL. How the next question that I have for you is that Pennsylvania is it a part-time legislative body, or is it a year-round?
We have a full-time legislature, and we are the largest legislature in the nation, second only to the United States Congress. We have the largest.
Really? How many people are there in the legislative body in Pennsylvania?
253. So we have 203 members in the House, and we have 50 state senators.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that big. To then God, if it's year round, I don't even know how to frame the question. So Georgia, it's just like, 60 days or whatever it is. And so, when stuff's coming, when you have to like focus all of your attention in that direction and the bills start coming out. So I guess they can drop legislative bills like anytime, June, December, March, like whenever somebody feels like it, then it pops up there.
Yeah, it really is year round. And just to zoom out a bit, I live in the capital city of Pennsylvania. And so that's kind of where my role in PARSOL, it was kind of a natural fit to be the person to do the legislative stuff and pay attention to the lobbying end of it and propose laws. So yeah, it really does happen year round. And our state is very user friendly when it comes to keeping track of proposed legislation. And so you can sign up for email alerts, and it's again very user friendly. Again, you just put in your email, and you get an email every day with the digest: what bills were voted on, what bills were introduced. And if you want to even focus more, you can just subscribe to the Judiciary Committee or the Finance Committee, and it'll tell you exactly what happened in that committee, what was introduced, what came out of it. And that makes it very easy actually to track what's popping up.
I don't have an example on the tip of my tongue, but I know that sometimes a bill will come down the pike that has essentially nothing to do with PFRs. However, there's PFR language in it that might not be running where you might see it. Do sometimes they miss? Because I guess our bills would normally fit in the judiciary committees. Like that's where almost everything would come from. But on occasion, I don't know, there's a tow truck bill that says that the tow truck driver is forbidden from picking up PFRs or something like that. And like, that doesn't have anything to do with PFRs actually, but they put that language in there just because someone said, this sounds good. Do sometimes those things fall by the wayside in your experience so far?
Yeah, sometimes those things come up, just not exactly as an extreme example. Example I can think of is, let's say the title of the bill is probation reform. Okay, sounds good. And when you dig into it and you get into the document there, as you mentioned, included in the middle, tucked in there is, except for PFRs, or, these offenses are not qualified. And so you do have to do a little more digging. Sometimes it makes it very easy for you with proposed legislation, sexually violent predator residency restrictions. That's obviously one you want to pay attention to. But then for something like probation reform or, sentencing reform or enhancements, that's one you got to open up and dig a little more into.
And when you do find those things, I'm interested in how do you, as a non-legal attorney trained kind of person, how do you read through the legalese? When I read legalese, it really rapidly, my eyes roll in the back of my head and they say, thou shalt not, like, oh my, stop, just stop. Can you just tell me, don't do these bad things to these people? How do you translate it into something that you can digest, consume, or are you just, one of those savant people that can read legalese and understand what it says?
It's like anything is practice, right? You don't get good at riding a bike the first time. You don't get good at public speaking the first time. You don't get good at reading legalese the first time, and you just keep doing it. Ideally, you have somebody there who can answer questions, but if you don't have that, you do your best, right? And there are guides, I can think on the Pennsylvania website anyway, it explains what a bold text means versus a strike
Oh,
through, and the
okay.
information is there. You just have to kind of be motivated to learn it. And if you're passionate about what you're into, like I am for getting the registry addressed and reforming sex offense policy, then you're motivated to do it. You're motivated to learn that stuff.
I'm intrigued by the way that you phrase that of the information is available. That I heard a third person conversation that the third person said that it's really hard to get information these days. Whereas back in the day you could go to, and I'm like, you are carrying around with you at all times the world's most elaborate communicator and also tracking device. But that's a different podcast, that you can find anything you want in all of history, just about. And yet we choose to doom scroll TikTok, which has a bunch of conspiracy theories and so forth, without anything valid to go look at. It is entertaining, of course. But so you don't end up like throwing stuff into ChatGPT and asking it to dumb it down for you. I put that in there specifically because I'm enamored with ChatGPT at the moment.
It is it's pretty incredible. I've seen some people do some examples of using that, and it's remarkable what it can do, but I have not personally used it. I haven't opened up that box, and I imagine there's some room for utility there. I am concerned, as we move forward. You mentioned information being available, and it is, but I wonder if we're reaching a plateau to a point now where we won't really know what is true and what is false. And I think that's already becoming hard. But now, if you have, very sophisticated computer programs creating things, and we're really going to be on a shaky foundation of, what is real and what's not.
I'm deeply the 2024 election is going to be phenomenal with the amount of money that will be put into artificial intelligence things. And you will watch a video of pick your candidate saying the most ludicrous thing, and it will look indistinguishable from reality. And I don't know how we are going to validate it and prove that anything that we're reading is true. It's going to be an incredibly interesting election cycle. And then, so if you had multiple bills that came up on your radar and only a limited amount of resources, how would you figure out which ones to focus on and try and attack and so forth? And then how would you even develop that strategy?
Yeah, it's like part of it is intuition in a way, of just kind of knowing, okay, this has legs. To zoom out again, I cut my teeth, or I really learned how to do this stuff in the Capitol and do lobbying and build relationships and track things from another group, which is focused on money and politics in Pennsylvania and on
Okay.
anti-corruption stuff. And so before I ever got involved with PARSOL, I was able to join this group and get like hands-on training,
Okay.
experiential training at the feet of these people who had done this for a while and knew exactly what they were talking about. And just being able to be in a meeting with, a state senator or a state representative or, the chief of staff for whoever, and just shut up and just listen, right? This is where I learned how to talk to these people, what a committee is, as you mentioned before, how a bill actually gets passed. And to bring it back to your question, learning that a lot of bills get introduced in Pennsylvania, and I'm sure other states and around the country too, a lot get introduced and very few move. Very few move. And so when I see a bill about residency restrictions 50 feet away from a school bus, I kind of roll my eyes and, we write it down,
Oh,
we put it
really?
in our tracker, which is available on our website, parsol.org, but we don't really take it that seriously because it's not going anywhere.
Okay.
And so when you have, like we do on our tracker, a dozen or 20 bills related to sex offense policy or PFRs, how do you know which one to really follow? Geez, like none are moving, like none are moving, none are moving. Um, and so I don't know, it's kind of hard to put a finger on like how, like I just understand or know that like these really aren't serious. Um, but I'm like thoroughly convinced that like as of this moment there is no serious threat to making things worse for this
Hmm.
community. Uh, Geez, and part of it is like here's one way to more or less get a really good feel for whether or not something's going to move. Is it introduced by a Republican or a Democrat? Right now in
Okay.
Pennsylvania, the Democrats control the House. So if a Republican introduces a bill in the House, it's not going anywhere.
I
And
see.
2 years ago, it was the opposite situation. The Republicans controlled the House. So any Democrat, and I mean literally any bill that a Democrat would introduce would not see the light of day. So that's one way to, just chop off a whole 50% of bills getting introduced. So it's important to know who is actually calling the shots, who is running the show in the Senate or in the House, if your state has that, who has the majority, because the other party, they're not going to get the time of day.
How much of a split is it? Is it a supermajority or is it just, one or two seats?
Well, in Pennsylvania, like the United States, we have a House of Representatives, we have a Senate. The
Okay.
state Senate is not quite a supermajority, but it's a pretty big split. I think there are like 30 Republicans and 20 Democrats,
Oh,
something like that. But in the House
okay.
of Representatives, it is a one seat difference.
Which is
It couldn't
which
be
is
any
similar to
closer.
the US.
Yeah,
It's
it could
similar to the
not be any
US
closer.
House.
Yeah, 102 Democrats, 101 Republicans. It is very, very close.
Oh, wait, isn't this where, oh my God, like the person got elected and then passed away, or they decided to not take the seat? Isn't that Pennsylvania that happened just this last year?
Yeah, we had a few special elections where this incredibly slim Democrat majority was thrown into limbo when somebody took a higher office, which happened outside of Pittsburgh. There was somebody who died, I believe, and we had to have a special election for that. There was somebody who resigned because of some scandal. They had to have a special election for that. And so it's like starting and stopping because they won't hold session if they don't have a majority because they don't want to take the risk of, not getting their way with their one seat majority.
That's crazy. And so before we move on to like Torsorelli and others, I do want to ask specifically about interacting with, I'm sure you have a chosen party that you kind of affiliate yourself with. However, you then have to go talk to the other team. And I'm interested in how do you address that if you're Democrat, if you're Republican, how do you go talk to the other team without having seething expressions on your face saying, I hate what you stand for, and still go talk to them in a professional manner? How do you address that?
Yeah, it's like you have to just remain detached in a way, kind of remain above it all. And I feel like if you are a cheerleader for either one of the two parties, you might not like find this work to be that easy, right? And I feel like more and more people are independent and people are fed up with both of the major parties. They are fed up with the inaction, and more people identify as independent, and to hell with both of them. And that more or less describes my stance as independent. They are both beholden to their wealthy donors.
Yeah, sure.
They, at the end of the day, want to get reelected and get campaign cash, and that is their only concern. That is their number one concern. So to me, like, yeah, there are differences in like culture war stuff with, Republicans and Democrats, but like fundamentally, I'm not talking to like very different people, right? These people are in the ruling class. They are wealthy. We have very little in common with the majority of them. Working people have very little in common with any of your Democrat or Republican representatives. And so again, you just kind of try to stay above that. The things we're talking about are moral issues, whether we're talking about corruption with the other team that I'm with, or we're talking about people's dignity and constitutional rights. like we do with the PFR reform movement. These are moral issues. This isn't culture war stuff. We're talking about harm reduction. We're talking about prevention of sexual offenses. We're talking about respecting the constitutional rights of all people who live in this state. And so you really gotta stay above, again, culture war nonsense that's really meant to just divide us.
Fantastic position. I like the way that you look at that. Let's go over to, I do have a bunch of questions regarding Torsorelli and then maybe some other things that we can fill in if we have the time at the end. Could you give me a synopsis, the 30-second elevator pitch of what went down, what Torsorelli was, and is going to be?
Once upon a time, there was a person in Pennsylvania who had a Romeo and Juliet kind of offense, and this person was put on the sex offense registry. So he did not like this, right? So he appealed to
Sure.
the courts, and he said, "Hey, I'm not a high risk, okay? And your law, Pennsylvania, says right in the text that due to the high risk of all of these people who have committed sexual offenses, they need to have some of their liberties curtailed, and they need to be on this registry." So Torsolari said, "I'm not a high risk, and I got all this evidence to show it. So take me off this list." And so the judge was persuaded, and it went to the Supreme Court because this handled a constitutional issue, which in Pennsylvania can go right from the trial level court to the Supreme Court if it tackles constitutional stuff. And
Okay.
the Supreme Court heard his argument, and they still have not made a ruling, and we are waiting for a ruling. There's a lot more in between the beginning and end of that story I just told, but that's the 30-second version.
Can you give me the timeline? So when did the original judge make that decision for it to then elevate to the Supreme Court? What kind of timeline have we been looking at with that?
Yeah, I regret that I don't have the exact date, but it was around
That's fine.
2016, 2017.
Holy moly.
Yeah,
Really?
When this started at the trial level court, and then it got up to the Supreme Court for the first time in 2019 or 2020. And then it was heard, and then the Supreme Court said, "Hey, we need more evidence. So go back to start, Commonwealth, and show us where these people are also high risk. We need an evidentiary hearing, so go back to the start." So that's what made this take even longer. So they went back, and then COVID happened, and
Yeah.
it's been a long road.
Well, I didn't realize that it had been going on for that long. So go back to start. So Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, go get evidence that says that these people do have a high risk of reoffense. What evidence are they then bringing to the table that says that there is a high risk of reoffense?
Well, they again got their second chance to introduce their evidence when it got remanded back down to the trial level court, and they brought in an expert. And I'm afraid I don't know much about this expert, and I could have done a better job of understanding the Commonwealth's arguments. To be honest, I was like very set already in my opinions and the research that I've read and that we're all familiar with about reoffense rates and risk levels of people who are on this list. And so I didn't pay attention, I'm afraid, to what the Commonwealth had to say as far as their evidence for why PFRs are high risk. I believe one thing they said was that just because some studies show that there is a low risk doesn't mean that that is the be all end all. And the counter to that, of course, is, well, sorry, it's like unanimous. All of these research studies point to this conclusion. So maybe there is one or two outliers, but it really does seem like a vast majority are pointing to low risk. I'm sorry, I don't know what the Commonwealth had to say as far as why they're high risk.
To give you a plug, I was watching one of the YouTube videos that you do have on the PARSOL website where you did like a 45-minute deep dive into it. And there was something that you said, and I don't have it quoted, but you said that they said, so the Commonwealth said, well, there aren't no studies that say there is a high risk of reoffense, but we have this one study. So it's not that there are no studies, but we have this one. So here are the 100 that say there is a very low chance, but we do have this one. So it's not that there's not no. And it was like, okay, all right, good job on the wordsmithing. So I'm sure that you could find a way to construct a study to find that there is a higher chance of recidivism. But have you ever heard the conversations that I've had with Larry about how recidivism is just a complete non-starter argument?
I've listened to your podcast a couple times, but no, I haven't heard this interchange.
Are you a first-time listener of Registry Matters? Well, then make us a part of your daily routine and subscribe today. Just search for Registry Matters through your favorite podcast app, hit the subscribe button, and you're off to the races. You can now enjoy hours of sarcasm and snark from Andy and Larry on a weekly basis. Oh, and there's some excellent information thrown in there too. Subscribing also encourages others of you people to get on the bandwagon and become regular Registry Matters listeners. So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to Registry Matters right now. Help us keep fighting and continue to say FYP.
So here's the scenario. So I have a Gatling gun. And, you know, like the thing with, we're gonna stuff bullets down the thing, and I'm gonna tick, 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 and we're gonna put in 97 blanks, and we'll put in 3, and that'll represent the 3% or whatever recidivism rate. You go stand at the other end of the football field and let me go at it. And would you be willing to stand on the other? You only have a 3% chance of getting hit. Would you be willing to take that? So the moral of that story is that, well, no one's going to go stand on the other end of that. So it's not a 0% chance. So there is something. So to make the recidivism argument, you're almost always going to lose because someone's going to go, but if it just saves one child.
Yeah, and you know we've heard that that very argument, Theresa and I, when we were in a state senator's office. He talked about, right, even if we save one victim from this kind of thing, then the registry is worth it. And we had to point out, I'm sorry, sir, but that is a really kind of defeatist and weak stance. If you could utilize policy and the best prevention methods, then that is your duty to do that as a public servant, to make sure that you're using the best available methods. And instead you are, advocating for, we will continue to prop up an ineffective method that may have some benefit to very few people. And we are failing as a state. If that's the stance we're going to take, sir, then we are failing.
Interesting point. Was PARSOL involved in the case at all from the beginning? And the reason why I'm asking that is because so often we cover a case on the podcast that it says, wait a minute, this hit the Supreme Court of Nebraska? Like no one knew about it. So the people that were filing the case never did any advocacy searches to find someone that could sign on for an amicus brief, anything of that sort. And it's just like, well, how did this get decided and no one knew about it? So anywho, I'm asking, was PARSOL involved in Torsorelli at all?
No, not this one. We have submitted amicus briefs in other cases. More recently, we submitted an opinion to the United States Sentencing Commission to talk about, sentencing levels for these kind of crimes on the federal level, but that's another story. No, we were not involved in this one. And kind of a funny story, when we went to the last hearing in the Supreme Court in May of this year, we got to meet the defendant, Mr. Torsorelli, and he had no idea who we were. It was like laughable. I couldn't believe him when, I shook his hand and he had no idea what PARSOL was. And, just tell him, man, you are the reason, like, we're in large part that we're doing what we're doing. But he likes to keep a low profile.
Sure, I can imagine. I was in the court when the court case for the Halloween signs in Butts County, and so NARSOL funded essentially at least bootstrapped that whole thing, and I imagine that those cats had no idea who anybody from NARSOL or the Restore Georgia group. I'm certain they had no idea who any of us were, and then probably after the fact also still have no idea or no interest in following along with what is going on, and that's kind of demoralizing. Like, if you don't care how we're going to help you, why should we then try to help you? Do you have an opinion? Let me ask you that. What is your thought on that? About how many people are on the registry in Pennsylvania that you're trying to help that don't give a flip that you exist?
Yeah. I mean, total numbers for the registry in this state is around 23,000 people. I think that, yeah, it's a mixed bag. You'll get a lot of people who want to, right, bury their head in the sand and put their fingers in their ears and just disappear. I I couldn't really take a guess as to, what percentage would appreciate what we're doing and want to get involved. I'd say a fair amount, but hey, yeah, there's always
Yeah.
people who just want to, pretend like it's going to go away and hide.
So to speak like to some details about the Torcellari case, how does Judge Allison Bell Royer justify her finding that Pennsylvania's Megan's Law is unconstitutional, both facially and as applied to the specific case of Commonwealth versus Torcellari?
Yes, well, you mentioned Judge Royer, and to explain a bit, this case started right around 2017 at the trial level in Chester County, and then it went to the Supreme Court in 2020. The Supreme Court said go back down to the trial level court to introduce new evidence, Commonwealth, and that's where Judge Royer comes in and makes her decision. So she made her decision in 2022 at the trial level court and sent it back up to the Supreme Court like they asked this court to do. And as she sent it back up, she gave her opinion. And to quote it, it says that SORNA is unconstitutional both facially and as applied to this defendant on the basis that it employs an irrebuttable presumption that is not universally applicable, and because its punitive nature offends Elaine and Apprendi, results in a criminal sentence in excess of the statutory maximums, violates federal and state prescriptions against cruel and unusual punishment, and breaches the separation of powers doctrine. So that is how she worded it, and that's how she found that SORNA is both facially, that means for everybody in the state, as well as applied, that means to Torcellari himself. That's how she worded it. But to zoom out from that and explain a bit more, she made this decision from listening to the expert witnesses that Torcellari was able to bring into the courtroom. People like Elizabeth Letourneau, people who have researched this stuff. I think Hansen was in there. Forgive me, the names escape me right now. But the
Chris
defense,
Hansen, I believe.
Yep, defense was able to cite these experts who have made it their livelihoods and who have been studying this stuff for decades. And that's how she was convinced. That's how she came to these conclusions. I can briefly talk on what some of this stuff means, like irrebuttable presumption, if you like. But
yeah, I
in
do
general,
actually, because I saw in your video you had used the wrong term and then you went back and you corrected that it was like irrebuttable, I think,
yes.
And now you're changing the term.
Right. So in the video that I did, which you can find on our YouTube channel at PARSOL, what I said in the video is I was highlighting that in Pennsylvania's Constitution we have a very unique aspect, which is the it means like unseverable.
Okay.
Yeah, and then now the word escapes me again. So I will get back to you on that. But back to this decision, it is talking about the irrebuttable presumption. And the irrebuttable presumption is what you could say this whole case rests on. It is the presumption of the state, Pennsylvania, that says all of these people are high risk. And therefore, these things have to happen. And there is no way for the PFR to defend against that or to challenge this irrebuttable presumption, this presumption that the state has made that this is a fact and therefore this must happen. Well, there's no way for the person who is affected by that decision to challenge it. And that's,
Wouldn't that be then just simply due process?
I am not a lawyer. I do not have that
Yeah,
legal
me
training.
neither.
And if I had Josiah here, my friend on the legal committee, he could probably answer these questions better. But yeah, I mean, it seems to relate to due process.
Because it seems if you have no ability to prove that you are not what they are claiming you are, that to me that sounds like a due process claim. And maybe there's a Venn diagram here, and these things are overlapping. Did Kennedy Mendoza Martinez factor into her claiming it was unconstitutional? I love the Kennedy Mendoza Martinez test. That's why I would like to focus on it.
Yeah, so if you go to our website, you can find a link to the entire decision. It is 12 pages or so, 20 pages or so of reading. And you're right, to decide whether or not she wants to make this ruling, she examined the SORNA, the Sex Offender Registration Notification Act in Pennsylvania, and she ran it through the Mendoza-Martinez test, if you will. So these are 5 different examinations of whether or not a law is able to be applied. or meets these criteria. And if you meet these criteria, then you can say that the law is punitive. And she was easily able to, check off all 5 of those boxes as far as SORNA goes, and the kind of uh, consequences it has for a person even after they've served their sentence, to demonstrate that yes, indeed, this is punitive in Pennsylvania.
Interesting. And could you tell who is Justice Christine Donahue? Would that be one of the Supreme Court justices?
Yeah, she sits on the Supreme Court in the state, and as this has reached the Supreme Court twice now, again in 2020, and when it came back for the closing hearings in 2023, she's been very vocal on, pressing the state. Why are these people a high risk? Why is it that you have a determination to make somebody an SVP, which is like tier 3 in our state, a sexually violent predator, if you will? Why is it that you run those people through a test and determine that they're a high risk, but you're saying that everybody's a high risk? So if you have a test to
Oh,
make
I
sure
gotcha.
that if you have a test that can tell you whether or not somebody's high risk, why haven't you done it for everybody? And are you saying then that everybody's a high risk, but these people are extra high risk, right? And she's asking, what is the logic here? How does this work?
That's kind of hilarious. That so you have a test to identify the ones that are high risk, but everyone's a high risk.
Yeah, right.
Do you think that God, that to me that seems almost like a linchpin that would then make everyone else, well, they're an else. I mean, if you make everyone essentially an SVP, then I guess like no one would be an SVP. But so you how do you think that would influence the court's decision on the constitutionality of SORNA?
The fact that they have a test and are not using it.
Yeah, and at the same time, then identifying that everyone has a high risk of recidivation.
Well, how will this affect the ruling?
Yeah,
Again, I think it just speaks to the idea of an irrebuttable presumption.
right.
It's a blanket statement, and people have very different backgrounds, very different crimes, very different stages in their life, and where they're at. Are they just out of prison? Have they been out of prison for 50 years? And so, yeah, this is kind of a linchpin, a central issue to this case. This broad brush that we're painting in Pennsylvania, specifically here, but really around the nation, that everybody on this list is, a danger and needs to have their liberties curtailed, even well after their sentence is completed.
Sure. And I believe that you take a first person approach to criminal justice reform. How does this align with or challenge the prevailing views on managing PFR type offenses?
Right, person first. Well, we were.
Do you want to cover
informed.
that term to begin with?
I'm sorry. Do I agree with it?
Do you want to cover how that, like a definition of what person first would be?
Yeah, person first is recognizing that people are not they're not defined by their actions. And so there's a lot more to a person than, the worst thing they ever done. In our movement here, persons forced to register, we don't say sex offender, because that does not, describe who that person is, right? You could say something like a person with a sex offense, a person convicted of a sex offense. And so what you're putting forward first is that this is a person, this is a human being with a life, needs, wants, responsibilities, hopes, dreams, failures, successes. And it doesn't just, pigeonhole them and put this label on them as a sex offender. And this came out of the disability rights movement, where we didn't call people handicapped people or disabled people. They're a lot more than that, right? They're brothers, fathers, mothers, sisters, students, teachers. There's a lot more to them than just this label. And so this perspective was informed by one of our founding mothers, Dr. Theresa Robertson, and coming from her background in therapy and knowledge of that disability rights movement, we want to put that forward. And I feel like all people in this movement kind of share that, not demonizing this population or painting them into a corner by calling them a sex offender. And so as far as a person first approach, it would involve understanding where a person is in their lives, and what their treatment needs are, what their rehabilitation needs are, respecting that you do the crime, you do the time, but there is a way forward after that, and people do change. That's one of our core principles. People do change. And so you don't necessarily need to be on on a sex offense registry for 40 years after you've done your time.
Hmm. I was intrigued that during one of the interviews, I watched the one that you and Theresa did, more like just kind of like a fireside chat almost, and that she brought up that when she first heard the term sex offender, and she was like, "Oh my God!" Like a fear response kicked in, and then sometime later, her child ends up with an offense, and so with all of that, she argues that not only is the registry ineffective, it also can contribute to an increased likelihood of reoffense. So do you know what evidence she's citing to that says that this supports this claim? And do you think that would also impact the court's consideration?
Do you mean the claim that the registry has negative effects on reentry? I'm sorry, which claim?
Yeah, exactly that. So if you're on the registry, so supposedly the registry would then, if it only saves one. However, because it puts a registrant in a box, makes it more difficult, significantly more difficult to function, that then they would have a higher chance of recidivating. So does that evidence and research, do you think that then impacts how the court's decision would come out?
Yeah, I think it will. And this is something that Dr. Letourneau introduced at the trial level again when it was remanded. And this is something that Judge Royer brings up in her decision, that studies have demonstrated the difficulty that being on a registry results in for reentry. And this is something we all know. For regular listeners to this podcast, this is nothing new. For those who might be new, it's very difficult to re-enter society after being in prison to begin with, having a label of sometimes a felon or a criminal. But it's much harder when you have a sex offense on your record and you're listed on a registry. Your options become very limited for employment and for housing. And we in this state, we have a public policy on the executive level that we need to foster reentry. We have a goal as a state, and this is, again, listed in policy, that we have a duty to foster reentry and make reentry as smooth as possible. This is one reason that residency restrictions in this state were struck down around 2016, I believe, somewhere around there, because the challenge, I believe it was in Allegheny County, was made that residency restrictions are counterproductive to reentry. And the court in this case was convinced of that because of, again, the stated goal of Pennsylvania to facilitate reentry. The court ruled that we cannot do residency restrictions in this state because it would hinder reentry. That did not make it of the Supreme Court. The state did not choose to appeal it there, but it made it to a court high enough where nobody has seriously talked about residency restrictions since that time.
When do you know roughly when that was?
Yeah, it was roughly 2016, 2017, and I believe the case was Allegheny County. Somebody versus
okay.
Allegheny County.
Okay. This will close this section out. I'm curious about that, calling on legislators and policymakers to implement fact-based legislation, including recommendations from the American Law Institute. And I guess it was maybe a year or so ago that they came out with a big batch of recommendations. Do you have any ideas on which specific ones that PARSOL is proposing, and how might they address the concerns on the current registry system from the recommendations from the American Law Institute?
Yeah, this is kind of a tough one, because this is not like all or nothing. What the American Law Institute is recommending, which again is a body of lawyers, academics, former judges, professors who know the law and who make recommendations to all 50 states about what the best policy could be for your state. They've been doing this 100 years. They have a lot of clout. And in some states, what they say is kind of just copied and pasted into the law. And they have a lot of clout. And so on the committee level, they decided and approved a couple of years back, not the full level, but just the committee level, they decided that because of all the controversy with sex offense registries around the nation and all the problems with liberty and recidivism and ineffectiveness, they recommended that one, registries should be law enforcement only, private. This is not to say that you couldn't still access a registry, but you would have to ask for it. So if you have an interest in, your neighborhood or where your kid goes to school or where your wife goes to work, whatever, you can ask for this information from the police or whatever body would wind up administering this, and you would get this information. That's the first recommendation of the ALI. No more public registry, no more browsing anywhere in the country for any reason or for no reason, private law enforcement only registry. Number two, they recommend that the amount of crimes that land somebody on a registry should be very much curtailed. Again, we cast a very wide net, we paint with a very wide brush, and people who maybe access a public registry really might not know the difference between somebody who just got out, who has a history of hands-on abuse, versus, a Romeo and Juliet case, maybe who's been out for several decades. And so the ALI committee recommends that the number of offenses should be curtailed largely to hands-on offenses and violent crimes that should land you on a registry. Number three, they recommended that the period that you're on a registry should be maxed out at 15 years. They cite the evidence that we're all familiar with, that after decades of living in the community offense-free, you're no longer much of a risk, and you don't need to be on a sex offense registry past 15 years. They would say that's the maximum. Their fourth recommendation is that there should be no collateral consequences to being listed on a public or any sex offense registry, in this case, a private one. So they say that you should still be allowed to live where you want to live, free of residency restrictions. You should be able to, enjoy public services like parks and beaches, and you should not have any collateral consequences to being on this registry, which again kind of goes back to the idea of extra punishment. You already did your time, you did your probation, you're done. Well, you're not done if you're on the registry, which a lot of you already know. And so these are the four recommendations. And the last one there doesn't really affect us in Pennsylvania. We're lucky enough to have really no collateral consequences of being on the registry besides treatment obligations for some people. And so I say this is a tough one because some people in our movement, they're more or less absolutists, if you will, or it's all or nothing. There should be no registry, period. And so some people don't want the ALI recommendations, and I think it's a bad idea to give on that there should be a law enforcement only registry. Other people have the view that despite what the court may rule in this state, and we're anticipating that ruling sometime in the next 6 months, could be longer, could be shorter, there will be some registry. Some people believe there will be some registry. And so how can we do this right? How can we do this the best way where we can gain a lot of ground and still compromise? If you're interested in this kind of work and in getting involved in legislative affairs and contacting your elected officials, I would say that is something you ought to internalize and believe. You never get everything. It is always a compromise. It is always a compromise.
I've encountered those absolutists, and it seems, wow, okay, that's pie in the sky. That would be awesome. Also just shy of impossible.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like that is even remotely realistic. So then you would have to go for a realistic position of, just as an example, I personally believe that most of our issues would go away if there wasn't a public website and you could live/work within some kind of reason. So take away residency/work restrictions and take away a public facing website. And I believe that the vast majority of our issues would go away. Another one would be where people have to go register 4 times a year and it takes them 12 hours to do it. So 4 times a year, you're having to take a full entire day away from work. And maybe your boss doesn't know. And now you're asking for some kind of weird reason to take a vacation day. But I believe that those two things would make our lives, I don't know, 90% better?
Yeah, I think
Something
you're right.
like that.
And this is what the ALI recommendations would approve. So fingers crossed that the full ALI does approve these recommendations on the committee level, and that we can say with 100% certainty all around the nation, hey, team, hey, legislator, hey, senator, hey, chairman, these are the recommendations of the most influential law body in the United States. And what can we do? And I do want to mention, and I would be remiss if I didn't, that we have a very unique opportunity in Pennsylvania, and it is not like this in other states. And I sympathize with you, and it makes your job harder if you're not in Pennsylvania. I would not be asking for these meetings and having these conversations with these people if we didn't have a pending state Supreme Court decision which was looking at striking down the registry, right? So that is like a huge point of leverage that we are able to have with PARSOL and talking to the state legislature. If you don't have some kind of leverage, right? It's like a court case or something to back up. It's going to be a lot harder to convince the state legislature to make rational sexual offense laws policy. And I do want to recognize that because of this state Supreme Court case, that is why we are able to have good relationships and meaningful dialogue with our people in our state government.
Interesting. But, if it does come down that the Supreme Court rules in PARSOL's favor, then that would then be persuasive leverage for at least the immediate surrounding states, if not then nationwide, to say, here are the things that were found. How much impact do you think that decision, a positive position from the Supreme Court, how much do you think that would impact people's legislative work in other states?
Well, I think it would have a positive impact. I think that a state Supreme Court decision, if it is favorable, would be a wonderful asset and would really help the cause. I remembered the term from earlier. It is the indefeasible right.
Oh, indefeasible.
Yes, in the indefeasible right. And so I do want to mention that as well, that in our state's constitution, and it is the only state constitution in the nation that explicitly states in text that we have an indefeasible, residents of Pennsylvania have an indefeasible right to reputation. And
right.
This is what makes our state unique as well. And where it will be harder in other places that don't have an indefeasible right to reputation. And again, indefeasible, not able to be severed. Under no circumstances can it be severed. It is core. It can never be removed. And so that's part of what will go into this decision, we suspect. Other states will not have the right to reputation, but they will still be able to make an argument on the irrebuttable presumption. Again, the idea that people are high risk when there's really no evidence that people are high risk.
Especially if you then have a test to determine that someone's an SVP. So you're using a test to determine that the person has a higher chance of recidivism. However, we're not going to put you through that test. You still have a high chance of high recidivism.
Which may be, an unfortunate result of the state Supreme Court case, right? Perhaps the Supreme Court will word it in such a way that the legislature is able to say, okay, from now on, we're giving everybody a test, and we'll just do it that way. Now, how would that, work in practical terms? I don't know, but perhaps that's, the answer here. Everybody has to get a risk assessment.
Yeah, would they make it that everyone is high risk? If you want to, you can hire your own researcher, your own therapist, whatever, to determine that you're a lower risk, and then that puts the burden back on you to spend some number of hundreds of dollars to get this evaluation done. Randall, I don't have any other questions, and I want to thank you so much. But before we go, is there anything that you want to talk about, you want to plug, besides parsol.org, which we've mentioned a bunch, but is there anything else that you would like to go over, cover, plug, whatever?
Well, no, I think I did some plugs already. Our YouTube page is fairly active. I give some updates on there. Give us a subscribe if you're up for it. If you're in Pennsylvania, please do reach out to me, to Josiah, to John, to any of the other people on the team. It's very easy to find us on our website. We'd love some help. We'd love more support. And to people who are not in Pennsylvania, I would encourage you, as our host has mentioned, we need more people to stand up and show their face, right? Doing something in your state's capital and with your elected representative is really important. And it might not feel that way, and it is. So I would implore you to, even if it's just sending a letter, if it's sending an email, or if you are ready for it, go to their office and show them your face. They work for you, you pay their salary, and you have every right to be in their office and to let them know the situations and the conditions that have a meaning and an impact on your life. You have every right, just as much as the oil lobbyists do, as the casino lobbyists do, the pharmaceutical industry people do. They are not constituents of your state senator or state representative. They just walk in their office and they have a nice handshake and a good talk over, a glass of whiskey or whatever it is. And so remember, those people feel like the state legislature is very important. And so I feel like people in our movement should also have that same feeling that your state legislature is very important. If it's important to the multimillionaire lobbyist, and they're doing something about it and they find it worthy enough to spend their time on, it's worthy of your time too.
Let me circle back. I want to bring up two things. You are still under some kind of supervision. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
How does your handlers, as I call them, how do they feel about your advocacy work?
Yeah, I have a federal probation officer, and I've had 5 now over 9 years. And
Oh my God.
yeah, I didn't have the first one when I was involved in any of this, but the last 4 have all been supportive of what I'm doing.
Okay.
And I'm lucky, right? Not everyone
Yeah.
has, a cool PO or a cool supervisor, but they know, exactly what I'm doing, what I'm advocating for, and they're supportive of it. They could
Interesting.
tell me, hey, sorry, you can't be on the board of PARSOL anymore because you're talking to all these felons or people with felonies, right? Person first language.
Correct.
Um,
Correct.
but they have not done that, and I appreciate that. They don't have to do that. It's right in the conditions. I shall not, associate with people with felonies.
Correct.
And
Yep.
again, I'm grateful for the leeway I'm given for that, because obviously this is a pro-social and positive thing that I'm engaged in.
And the other thing is, you were going through your stump speech, so to speak, that you were saying that you have just as much right as others. So often people go, well, I can't vote. What can I do? So are you allowed to vote?
Yeah, in Pennsylvania, I can vote. Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, somebody in a different state where they can't vote could still do the same advocacy work that you are doing, and would, to me, I don't want to say that one vote doesn't count, but when the vote is split and there's 100,000 people that voted in your favor or against you, whichever way, it doesn't matter. Your one vote didn't matter in swaying anything. So going and talking to the legislative body, testifying, analyzing bills and so forth, that is something that does have a massive impact. And I just wanted to just cover that even if you are unable to vote, that you can have a massive impact on the lives of you and your family and the others around you,
Right.
if you get involved in doing advocacy work.
And I do just want to reiterate that I didn't do this myself, right? I had people who helped me. I found an advocacy group who already were in there. They had roots.
Yeah.
And I was interested in corruption and money in politics. So I clung onto them and I learned. So whatever you're into, whether it's gun rights or if it's, women's rights or death penalty or death by incarceration, whatever it is, find that group and latch onto them and then learn and just shut up and listen. And you will learn and you'll find out how this stuff works. And then once you have enough knowledge, you band with a couple of other people in the PFR movement and you're off to the races.
Fantastic. Thank you again. Excuse me. I really appreciate it for taking time on this Sunday afternoon. And so what website to go to?
Yep. Our website is parsol.org, parsol.org. You can find our torcillary headquarters, which is everything to do with this state Supreme Court case that is coming up. We have our YouTube channel. Just search for PARSOL on there or search for the right to reputation. If you want to learn about our state's unique right to reputation, that's the best way to find us.
Fantastic. Again, thank you so very much. And I hope you have the great rest of your weekend. I'll talk to you soon, buddy.
Rock and roll. Thanks for your help.
And to close out the show, I just wanted to make sure that we give acknowledgement and thank you to 2 new patrons this week of Amy and Steve. Thank you both so very much. It's really appreciated to help support the program. And you can go over to registrymatters.co for show notes and go over to patreon.com/registrymatters if you would like to support the show and the work that we do over here. Thanks so much, everybody, and talk to you in a couple weeks.
You've been listening to FYP.